Hello, I am Paula Bennett and welcome to my podcast, Ask Me Anything. I've gone through plenty of ups and downs in my life and have learned a lot along the way. But now that I've got a midlife crisis reinvention under my belt, I know it's never too late to learn something new. That's why on this podcast, I'm talking to Kiwis from all walks of life to hear about how they got to where they are and get some advice and guidance on some of life's biggest questions. In this episode, we are going to focus on a hot topic, the property market. I reached out to one of the best to bring us advice on the housing market, what's happening and where it's heading. Joining me is Bayleys Head of Insights Data and Consulting, Chris Farhi. Hi Chris, good to have you here.
Kia ora, Paula.
Now, we work together, Chris and I, at Bayleys, so obviously he's the best in the business.
Yeah, cheers.
Okay, couple of rules for the podcast. First is I'm allowed to ask you anything, but you don't have to answer.
Yeah, sweet, that works.
And it's a safe space. I call it no judgy, so we just don't do judgy.
Yeah, no.
Okay, icebreaker questions.
Yep.
Do you have a favourite sport?
Ooh, I'm not really sporty, but if I was watching something, it's probably going to be ice hockey. Yeah, just a little bit different, but it's because my parents weren't Kiwi, so we never really got the whole rugby thing growing up.
I visited Canada a while ago and I was by myself on a work trip, but I went out one night by myself to an ice hockey big game because I just thought, you've got to see it, You've got to see it live, and it really was something. Apartment or house?
Ooh, apartment. Yeah, and so this is probably controversial, right? And that's unusual, I guess, for Kiwis. But my wife and I, we've lived in the city for about 12 years now. And I think the edge on apartments is the convenience to do other things, so we've really enjoyed that whole lifestyle.
And the standard of them now, right, is quite different.
100%. And I think there's a massive difference between like a good and a bad apartment in terms of like not just location but design and everything. Like you could see how if you're in a bad apartment could be nightmare material, but if you're in a good apartment it works really nicely. So,
convenience of living,
100%.
Do you have a favourite karaoke song?
Ooh, I'm trying to think. I went to this big work party a couple of years ago. Oh, I just wouldn't even know off the top of my head what it is. It was probably something stupid like Backstreet Boys.
But you can't go
like
wrong.
Classic 90s.
Hey, anyone sing along.
100%.
And you're not really in karaoke. I always just say pick a sing-along song.
Yeah.
And then everyone does. Okay, let's get into it, I reckon.
Yes.
So you're head of insights, keeping Bayleys and their customers ahead of trends. So how important is it in property to not only stay on top of what's happening, but also try and stay ahead of those trends?
Yeah, look, I think it's really important, particularly at the moment, because the market's been changing so much. And I think because you're making such big investments, whether it be buying a house or selling a house, is sort of the reverse of that. I think it's important to understand what you're looking at doing before you get well into it. Like a good example of that is if you're planning to sell and maybe the conditions are a little bit harder, knowing that in advance so that you can anticipate some of the stresses that might come in. But equally at the moment, like there's some great buying opportunities. So just having a good understanding of where things are at, I think is really important.
So how do you keep up with the trends? So insights means that you're collecting data.
Yep.
So how do you collect that data to then be able to explain it to other people?
Yeah, so we use, I guess, three main sources for what we're doing. You've got a lot of market level data that gets published through the likes of Rhines, CoreLogic, and some of the big data houses. So we use a lot of that for general understanding. The second thing that we do is because Bayleys has quite a large market share across all asset groups, we have a lot of our own data sources which provide more detail on what's going on and allow us to get a better glimpse of the behind the scenes on just the transactions. And then the third source, which we actually find really useful, is just talking to our agents and customers on the ground because they can provide a lot of that context that you can't otherwise get.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the challenges is that most of the stats that are published are just the sales transactions. But behind the scenes, you've got obviously the transactions that went down well, you've got the ones that failed, you've got the different conditions, the backgrounds to the bids, like everything. So having a good understanding of like across the board is really important.
Can a few really large sales really skew the data for a particular suburb or city or town?
Yeah, so it's quite tricky. Generally speaking, like most of the stats that are reported in New Zealand will be medians. And so because it's a median, if you've got one or two outliers, that shouldn't cause too many problems. However, because New Zealand's quite small, and once you get into the smaller cities or some of the town level data, you might only have like 50 to 100 transactions in a month.
Yeah.
And so that means that the types of homes that sold during that period can actually influence the stats quite a bit.
Okay.
The best example I've got of that was Queenstown Lakes in April this year.
Yeah.
The median house price dropped. It was like from 1.5 million to like 900,000 in the course of a month. And then it bounced back the next month. But that was because there was a big tranche of apartments that sold in that particular month. And it just dropped the median outrageously, and then it bounced back up.
Yeah.
But you get a lot of that when you start to track, like medians at a suburb or city level. You do get a bit of volatility in the stats.
So how dramatically is the market changing? And I suppose with the 3 ways that you're collecting data, the interest in that as well is that it feels like the market's almost changing month by month. Would that
100%.
be accurate? Yeah?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I've started with Bayleys in October 2021, right? And it was such an interesting period because for those first couple of months, the residential market was on fire, particularly October, November 2021.
So what does on fire mean? It means that they're selling in a short period of time.
Yep. So short period of time for sales, large numbers of sales and good prices would be the sort of key indicators there. And so you saw in October, November last year, and this is interesting because it's 12 months ago, right?
Yeah.
A massive number of sales. You had price growth for, say, Auckland, median moving at like 50 grand per month, just up. And then you got into December, January, and it was like the market sort of switched off.
Yeah.
And that was pretty tricky because there were two things that were happening behind the scenes that people weren't necessarily like picking up on. The first was that interest rates started to rise from around mid-2021. People didn't really notice them rising up for the first 6 months. And then the second big trigger, which was the one that was in the media, was the triple CFA.
Yeah.
So this was the responsible lending rules that that got put onto banks. And that, I guess, created the trigger which took out a lot of the first-home buyers and people who might have slightly trickier circumstances to get funding. And so that was like your initial trigger, created a bunch of negative sentiment. And then through, I guess, January through to maybe a month or two ago, conditions were generally going backwards, although the rate of price decline has slowed quite a bit now. And to be honest, in the most recent months, so this was the October statistics, showed a flat line on prices, which is like a good thing relative to if you went back to the start of the year where prices were going down maybe 3% per month.
Yeah.
So you get a sense now that there's potentially a level of stability coming into the housing market, particularly in the major centres like Auckland and Wellington.
Yeah.
Although that's very dependent on where inflation goes and where interest rates go. The Reserve Bank's announcement, I think for the most part, a lot of that's already priced into interest rates.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't see it move too much on like the 3 and 5 year rates. But then you never know what's going to happen because initially the view was that inflation would spike up and then spike back down. That's been a little bit more persistent than they were hoping. So,
So that flat line that you talked about, does it vary across the country and for different types of property, whether that's apartment or housing or even commercial?
Yeah, so it's been interesting because the movements across the country have been quite varied. So if you look at the first 3 quarters of this year, right, we had Auckland and Wellington undergoing a pretty substantial correction, particularly Wellington, right? I think prices are down maybe 20% from peak. But then if you look at some of the other cities like South Island, Christchurch, Queenstown, they've still been like a lot more stable than Auckland and Wellington. And so there's 2 theories that you can kind of take out of that. One is that they're genuinely more resilient because maybe they're more affordable, or like in Christchurch as an example, or you take Queenstown where maybe people have reassessed the market and its natural beauty and all of those cool things, and that props up prices, which I think there's some truth to both of those. The other view is that there's some sort of lag effect coming through, and that maybe Auckland and Wellington move faster and then it then shoots out to the regions. So it's a little bit tricky to pick at the moment, but I think, there has been quite a variety of different movements depending on the region, and typically the more affordable regions have held up prices better than the less affordable regions.
Yeah. So are we seeing a reduction in the number of listings and houses for sale effectively?
Yeah, so what we've had generally higher levels of listings at the moment that are on the market, but I think what's happened relative to the start of the year is that at the start of the year, people got caught out. You had vendors who were going through the listing process at the back of 2021, putting it on market maybe January, February, and then they got caught out with this massive drop in the market, specifically in terms of lower numbers of sales.
Yeah.
And so I think that sort of group of vendors at the start of the year were caught out quite a bit, and as a result, you had fewer transactions. The vendors that are coming into the market now are much more schooled up on where the market is, and they're tending to be more, I guess, genuine in their intention to actually sell, rather than just chasing top dollar, which is what you might have seen last year. Yeah, so there's more listings coming on board. I think one of the cool things is that as a buyer, there's a lot more selection at the moment, and you can pick up a property that's going to suit you and take the time to really consider what you're doing, which is actually really exciting, because you consider the buying process in 2021, which was, okay, that property's come out, lost that one at auction, lost the next one at auction. Okay, cool, we'll just jump on that one because it's there.
And crazy, eh? I mean, that's why you saw the house prices rising so much. It was just like, we've got to have it. We've missed out 3 times.
Yep.
The bank's not going to lend us for it. Like we've got this pre-approval. Let's just go.
Oh, and particularly with the auction processes, right? Because you had people putting a bit of money into due diligence, get the lawyer in or the building surveyor. And they do that a couple of times. And then the next one, they're like, we're definitely taking this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the interesting things is, as a buyer at the moment, you can actually take some time and select a property that you love and actually, I guess, fall in love with it a little bit before you buy.
Yeah.
Rather than being a little
We're
bit
going to
cagey.
talk a bit about investment properties and the difference between commercial and residential and that sort of thing. But I try and go to as many of the auctions that I can at Bayleys. But the difference, you sort of go into the commercial ones and it's very transactional.
Yep.
And particularly, as you say, last year, you would go into the house ones and it's so emotional and so emotive.
So stressful.
So stressful for them. It's just like, I literally used to sit there and hold a few hands, like it's going to be all right. Just do whatever you're doing, Yeah.
It's interesting though, like from a vendor perspective. So we know from our stats that if you put your property through an auction process, there's a much higher likelihood that you'll sell it within 90 days, which is quite interesting as a statistic, because people would say, in the current market, maybe it's a bit softer, auctions are less attractive, but the whole process works quite nicely in terms of the staging of it, because number one, auction, you've got usually a good marketing campaign, you've got a lot of time pressure, you get the first stage of like unconditional parties, and then if that fails, you've got a really nice milestone where you move to like chasing conditional parties. And I think the other thing is that going to auction puts the vendor in the zone to sell. So if you want to sell, our statistics show that you should run an auction process. Even if it doesn't sell under the hammer, there's a much higher chance that you'll sell it later. So that interesting little.
No, that is. It's really interesting.
Yeah, because you wouldn't really think about that.
Well, and it's a big decision, right? You're selling your biggest asset. It's pretty nerve-wracking anyway. Yeah. And then trying to work your way through agents, choose that, and then spend that money on marketing, and then decide the way to sell.
Yeah.
And then people that perhaps have bought via auction are sometimes a bit burnt by that as well, and so less likely to kind of go into that process themselves.
Yeah, it's tricky. I guess some vendors and some people in the market will just say, no, I don't really want to deal with auctions.
Yeah.
We know that the reason that they are used so often is because it does work. So there is something to be said there. I mean, at the moment, one of the cool things is that if you're maybe not so keen on auctions and you're buying, then it's a good time to be able to jump in and negotiate with parties on either an asking price or a buy negotiation or a deadline. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I touched on commercial and residential as a different form of investment. So could you explain to some of those listening, and not the big developers with a lot of money, it's more, I've got a bit of money and I'm thinking about how I invest for my future. is it wise to look at some of that sort of commercial, and how do we define commercial?
Yep.
So is that the retail shop with the potentially the apartment, and it can be not just city, it can be in the suburbs, it can be in our towns.
Yep.
What's the difference in that kind of investment compared to perhaps residential?
Yeah, so I guess first contextually, right, so commercial property is pretty much anything that's not residential is the easiest way to describe it. So there would be small office buildings, if you're talking about entry investors, retail shops, smaller industrial properties, some of the unit titled commercial complexes. So you've got quite a few different options in that space, particularly when you start to then look at locations and the size of the investment. Yeah, so that's your context.
And we're seeing more of that owner-operator as well, looking at purchasing their building or their to give them a certainty of continuity for being able to work there.
Yeah, particularly in the industrial market at the moment. So your warehouse buildings. In most of the main centres, those markets are very, very tight from a leasing perspective. So if you're a business owner, if you want to go lease some space, it's actually incredibly hard to find an industrial property at the moment.
Yeah.
And so as a result, you've got a lot of competition for leasing, but you've also got occupiers looking at just buying a property so they don't have to deal with that issue.
Yeah.
And so they've become quite a significant buyer group for industrial properties at the moment.
Can we just stick with that commercial a little bit now?
Yeah.
So if I was looking at buying entry level, getting into perhaps commercial for an investment perspective, do I want a tenant that's there and got a long lease? And if so, obviously there's some tenants that are better than others. I always think fast food's going to be around forever, you know.
Okay, so
it might just be me, but you know what I mean. Yeah. So how much should you perhaps look at the tenant?
Yeah, so when you get into commercial property, I guess there's a couple of things that become quite important, right, for your investment decision. One is going to be just your general quality of the building and the sort of basic stuff that you'd see as you would with buying a house. The second issue is the quality of the tenant, but also the lease provisions that they have. And the reason for that is if you look at residential property and rental properties, and you'll know this from your time in government, Paula, there's a lot of regulation and like a safety net around what you can do when renting out a house.
Yeah.
When you get into the commercial space, it's much more negotiated. There's very few safety nets. And so as a result, if you're looking to pick up an investment, you have to be a bit more smarter about the tenant, but also the lease contract that they've got in place.
And that's the length of it, the conditions around it, whether or not it's CPI'd so that you can put the rent up and by what kind of percentage.
100%, yeah. So you'd have term is obviously usually good unless you're looking to occupy it yourself. But generally a longer term is going to be better quality tenant in terms of the brand, the performance of their business, and the guarantee structure.
Yeah.
Like if the tenant fails, what can you hook into to make sure that you get your rent? And then your rent review provisions, and then all the other softer points in the lease.
Is there an advantage in commercial versus residential investment? So I know we're, just to be really clear, we're not talking about first home buyers and those sorts of funds. But for that, the light socket breaks down in the house or the oven's not going, and as a landlord, you've got to do all of that for residential. Whereas with commercial, often it's like, well, I'm providing the building and you're on your own.
Yeah, look, I think there's pros and cons for each, right? Residential is cool because easy to understand market, and there's always going to be tenants in New Zealand because the rental market's so strong. Commercial, on the other hand, though, you're typically dealing with lower maintenance tenants.
Yeah.
And you typically also have a lot of service providers in place who will deal with things like, the light bulb fails or those sorts of issues. I mean, the other thing is because it's a business, you don't have some of those issues that you'd get with people living there.
Yeah.
So, like prime example, methamphetamine contamination, you're not going to get that with a commercial property unless you've got some really dodgy tenants.
Yeah.
But similarly, things like shower issues, like all those sort of daily things that you might get with a residential property.
So you've touched on it, Chris, anyway, around some of the advantages and disadvantages, particularly in commercial. But talk to us a bit more about that sort of risk of commercial versus residential when you're putting such a massive investment in and nothing comes without risk, right?
100%, yeah. So you get your return because of the risk. Yep. So that's important. Starting with residential, I mean, I guess the reason that people like it in New Zealand generally is The rental market's pretty tight and you're dealing with similar sort of issues as you would if you were buying a house. So it'd be like building issues and that type of thing. But generally your risk profile there is going to be mainly around things like tenants damaging the property or just general market things like interest rates going up and values going down. So that's your residential.
But you're likely to be able to rent the place. That's what you're saying. We've got more people wanting to rent than we've got rental properties available. So that's the advantage, right?
I think the other thing is that residential, you'll generally always be able to rent it for a price.
Yeah.
And so at the moment, and to be honest, over the last probably 20 years, the rental market's been extremely tight. And if a property becomes vacant, you might need to negotiate on price a little bit, but you could be pretty confident that you're going to be able to tenant it.
Yeah.
When you get into the commercial space, it's a bit trickier, but for that reason, you generally have higher income returns than you would from residential. So then you have to start thinking about the asset type. I guess you've got office, industrial, and retail as probably your three key categories. If you look, we'll take retail as like a good example. You do have to be quite selective about the location and the style of building that you're dealing with, because an extremely well-located retail property will probably always be able to get tenants.
Yeah.
Just due to things like exposure.
Parking. We love parking.
Yeah, the other tenants that are in the block. So you get from a good retail property, you've got a stronger chance of it being consistently occupied. But then you get into some of those almost like ghost areas where some of the townships where maybe over time traffic patterns or the pattern for the major sort of anchor tenants in the areas moved away. Yeah. And so they'll be at higher risk of hitting vacancies, which then can become a problem if you obviously need some money to pay your mortgage. Yeah. So you've got that tenancy risk, particularly at the moment coming off the back of COVID. Now, hopefully things will start to moderate and you'll get that activity coming back to townships, but that is still a risk in that retail space.
Because we see lots of empty shops around, right? All the time.
Yeah. And I think there's certain areas where a shop might go empty and then it gets leased again and it's some really low quality retailer. And so then there's a pretty good chance that their business will be at risk anyway. Yeah. Yeah. So you do have to be a bit conscious of that. That said, in most locations, you'll have at least some higher grade tenants, places like banks or some of the major retailers that are locating in there probably be a lot more stable. Cool. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that's retail as an example, but you've got similar sort of things happening with office and industrial where you just have to be a little bit conscious around location, the style of building and the ability to keep it tenanted. Yeah.
We're going to wind up this segment in a minute and then we will get into those first home buyers and then what's happening there. We can't go past talking about both commercial and residential investment properties without asking what yield means.
Sure.
Because so, it's bandied around and it's actually, I think a bit tricky to get your head around if you're not doing it daily.
Yeah, and it's tricky because within the property market, you've got different ways of defining it as well, but generally, if you're talking commercial property, the yield is the amount of net rent. So it's your rent after outgoings divided by the value of the property. So that's your general sort of concept. And within New Zealand at the moment, it's probably sitting anywhere, depending on market, between like 4% and like 8%. But there's been a lot of movement this year, similar to what you saw with the residential market. The commercial market's been going through the same sort of process. Yeah. Yeah, and it's the same factors, interest rates. And
is that kind of the profit that you get from the property, or is it the way the banks look at the investment for perhaps giving you a mortgage for that property and how it pays off?
So the yield is your income return. So that's what you'll be getting just annually by renting it. So it's just your pure rent return. On top of that, you will also, over the long term, have a capital gain component, which is actually separate to that. So your total return will probably be higher. That's not financial advice, though.
No, it's not.
Absolutely not. Yeah, so you've got two components to the return, the yield and then the capital gain. Yeah. Right? So that to the side. When you get into the banking side, when they're looking at loaning money, they will have two different things that they're interested in primarily. One will be the value of the loan relative to the value of the property. Yeah. It might
just
be
like for housing, right?
Yeah, just like for housing. And it's probably, like 40 to 50% would be where they'd cap out. And then the second is what they call an interest cover ratio, which is if you take your rental, how much headroom do you have above the interest cost that the bank loan would be applying to you.
Mm.
And again, depending on the market, it'd be somewhere around maybe two times that they'd be looking for.
And it's the same, right, with residential. If you're looking at it as an investment property that you're going to rent out, the yield is, again, relevant to the income that's coming in, to what you've paid for the property.
100%. I mean, it's tricky, right? Because if you went back maybe 15 years ago, it's pretty common to negatively gear a rental property, and the tax laws at that point were actually quite permissive for that. These days, I think you have to be a bit more conscious about the cash flow that the property's generating, because I guess not everyone's going to have money to top up interest payment.
Yeah. And it's, look, I suppose I'm giving an opinion here. Let's hope that we don't see the massive price increases in capital gain, which I know is hard to say because some of us have certainly been advantaged by that over the decades. But, you know, it has priced people out of the market. And so if you're relying purely on that capital gain like you used to, then we're in a very different market now.
I think that's right. And I mean, one of the things that's been quite significant over the past decade or so for that capital gain has been the consistently reducing interest rates that we saw between, say, 2010 and 2021.
Yeah.
So, like, if you look at the interest rate path, it was just like consistently dropping. And that's obviously gone straight through to values. And so it's probably less chance that you'll get that massive gain moving forward. So for that reason, you want to focus more on cash flow, I think, at the moment.
Yeah. Well, this has been really interesting, and we're already giving advice, so there you go. But we're going to take a quick break now, and then Chris is going to come back and we're going to talk more about the current market for all ages and stages of home ownership. Okay, Chris, let's get into the nitty and gritty now. Advice for those already in the market, those wanting to get into the market. So let's start with the obvious. Is now a good time to buy a house?
Well, it's a good time because you've had a price correction, and quite a substantial price correction. So for the buyers at the moment, it's actually a very interesting time. You've got a good selection, you've got an ability to negotiate if you want to, or just rock in with that unconditional like cash offer. So
unconditional means I've got the money, I don't need to go to the bank. I've got,
it means you're just ready to contract it and commit right now.
Yeah.
With no outs, just straight up, we will buy this.
Yeah.
And so that's quite powerful when you're dealing with vendors at the moment who might be seeing a little bit of uncertainty around not just the price they could sell for, but the amount of time before they sell.
Yeah.
And so having the ability to come in with an unconditional offer, obviously you need to have done all your homework beforehand, talk to your lawyer, got your funding lined up if you need it, building surveyor, like all those sorts of things. But if you are in that position, then that puts you in a you become a very attractive buyer to vendors, because they know that if they sign you up, that's the deal done.
Yeah.
And that they can,
so whereas if I'm doing one with conditions, it might be that you've got at least a month or even, longer, and my sale, if I'm the vendor, so I'm selling the house, I'm still at risk of that not selling.
100%. Yeah. And obviously the conditions, you can vary them, and they vary in risk. So you could have some low risk ones around buyer needs to get some funding and maybe they've already pretty much solved it. So that's pretty easy. Or short due diligence. And then on the other end, you've got, we'll buy it conditionally, but we need to sell our property. And then straight away, your vendor's going to be looking at that saying, well, actually, we're in that process at the moment.
Yeah.
Is it going to be an easy property to sell?
Yeah. Okay, so would you buy at the moment? I diverted you off then.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think at the moment, like we already own, so like we're not buying right now, but we would consider buying if we didn't own, because you've got good conditions, you've got good negotiability from vendors, and you've got a good selection of properties, and not like a good selection of crap properties. You've got a good selection of good properties at the moment. And I think if you're buying, you're probably looking at it as like a 5-10 year decision, on average, around the amount of time that you want to live somewhere. So the ability to choose a property that you genuinely like, rather than sort of being forced into this is the one that's there right now. I think that's very, very powerful.
Yeah. Some will be really nervous about interest rates. Though, they're higher than what we've seen, obviously, but not as high as some of us have experienced, over time. So is that a factor
Yeah,
people?
look, I think the interest rate thing is interesting, right? Because last year you could fix like 5-year mortgage rate at somewhere around 3%, which is outrageously low. These days you're probably looking somewhere over 6% for that. But if you did have concerns around where interest rates are going in the short term, the obvious solution to that would be to go for a fixed interest rate, for 3 or 5 years or something like that. Obviously,
and then your affordability, right? You know if you can pay it back.
100%.
The bank know whether you can pay it back.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it's about. So
and so you need to just think it through and get some advice from the likes of a mortgage advisor or a financial advisor if you need it, around the merits of going for like a 1-year short-term fix, which will move around, versus just fixing it out for 5 years. When we were buying, we just took the 5-year fix because we knew that like interest rates were pretty low, and if we're good at that level, then we're sorted for 5 years. And so I think there is merit to having that certainty.
So for those that are in the market, it's now a good time to sell.
Yeah, so like obviously it's not as good as 2021. Would be the sort of clean response to that. I think it depends on your reason for selling. If you just want to sell to make big bucks and you don't really have a plan in mind straight away, and then maybe you sort of pause and just reflect on why you would look at selling.
Yeah.
That said, if you've got genuine reasons like lifestyle change, or you need to move, or you need a bigger house, or whatever it is, then obviously it makes sense to sell to be able to move on with your life and get things sorted. Going into that process, though, you just need to be a little bit aware that the market is quieter than it was last year, which
So have price expectations.
Yeah, so you want to have reasonable expectations. And I think that's really the key thing, is that if you've got reasonable price expectations and they're informed by a solid agent and comparables, and it's not just someone telling you what you want to hear. So if you've got really reasonable price expectations, then you can be confident around a sale. It'll take longer than it did last year. If you've got unreasonable price expectations, then you're going to find it a hard market, because it's unlikely that the market's going to increase to bridge that gap in your expectations. Whereas in 2021, there's a reasonable chance that if you came in with high expectations, the market might have just come to meet you.
Yeah. Okay, let's give people tips for selling to start with, because we can both do that, being in the industry. So should I stage my property? My advice is yes. Presenting your property the best you can, obviously.
Important for hooking people into seeing that they can live there and sort of building that dream up for them. So good quality staging is going to go a very long way. Failing that, and we've seen this across the network quite a bit, is that if people don't want to go the full flog of getting complete staging in, at minimum getting some advice from either a staging company or an interior designer around how you should set out your furniture, and maybe some of those small items that you could do to make it look more presentable.
Declutter.
Get rid of like the big ugly piece of furniture in the corner that's been sitting there for like 10 years. So it's things like that. Generally speaking, if you look at the staging, they go minimal clutter and they get rid of stuff. So you go into what could be a reasonably big room and they'll have minimal furniture. And that's because generally clutter is going to make your house look small.
Shall I give now my biggest tip for buying?
Yeah, go for it.
Don't look at the staging. The picture on the wall is not relevant to whether you should buy that house or not. Women are terrible for it. I know that's so that's so sexist, but honestly, I do it myself. Oh my God, look at that appliance they've got in the kitchen, and then I've forgotten to
like
look
those
at
fancy couches that
yeah. Oh my God, that rug goes well. If I live here, then I'm really, I wonder if I can get the rug with it. And it's like, oh my goodness, the rug is the least relevant thing to this massive purchase you're about to do.
It's funny you say that as well, because I started my career in property development, and I was working basically getting apartments built. And I remember watching some of these downsizers come into their brand new apartment. We had these really nice like apartments and townhouses, and they'd bring in all their giant old furniture from like, I don't know, like the big bungalow or whatever. It used to just be amazing because you go into this house and the staged version looked amazing, like really spacious. And then you go into their place, they've got their big clunky drawers. You're like, oh my God.
yeah. How's that going to mean? Yeah. Okay, so tips for selling. So you've tidied it up, you've decluttered, you've got some advice even on how to do your own furniture, or if you're not living there, you can do a bit more staging and that sort of side of it. You touched on the sale process, and we won't go back to it because we've already talked about it quite a lot, but it is interesting that you've got the evidence that auctions do work. Your agent matters, eh? So how much would you pick the company that you're going to work for? And let's put our own bias aside.
Yeah.
How much would you look at an agent that's been selling quite well in your local market, and potentially it's both, of course, a well-branded company? What's the agent advice?
So it's interesting. I mean, the first and foremost thing I think is the agent's going to be someone that you're going to be dealing with a lot over the sale process. And the sale process, no matter what, has a bit of stress associated with it.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to make sure it's someone that you enjoy talking to for starters and enjoy dealing with. So put that aside. I think one of the important things is that you're dealing with an agent who's familiar with the local market, who has recent listings and can draw that into your sale process. So on balance, you're going to want to go with an agent who is doing a lot of work in your area, if anything, because they would have touched base with the different parties that are in the market at the moment.
Yeah.
The second thing I think is the brand. Like, we're obviously fortunate being at Bayleys, we've got an awesome brand, but you do have to be conscious of, if you've got like a higher end property, there's certain brands that tend to resonate a bit more with that.
Yeah.
Their marketing collateral will tend to resonate better with the property, and just their overall approach. Like some agencies will go for certain routes with the marketing, which will fit a lot better.
Yeah.
So I think there is a brand decision, but then there's also a salesperson decision, and they can be two different things, keeping in mind that most brands will have multiple agents in an area.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you do have a bit of selection there.
Wrapping up the sales, you are thinking wisely about the sales process. You're picking an agent that knows the local market that you like working with because you're going to be spending a lot of time with them. You're presenting your property to the best that you possibly can. And let's be frank, that didn't matter so much 12, 24 months ago because we were on the supply and demand and the demand was higher. Now it's reversed, and so how you present really does matter, and you're being realistic in what your price expectations are. Then go for it.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that price expectations is really the key one.
Yeah.
If you're in the zone and you've got your expectations set correctly, then you should be all good.
Yeah.
If your price expectations are just wildly high or have been set incorrectly by the agents, keep in mind that, as part of the pitching process, quite often agents will say, we can sell it for like this much.
Yeah.
And so there can be a bias around appraising it high that you have to be a little bit conscious of.
Okay. Good. Okay, now let's give some tips for buying.
Yep.
So I've already given mine. Don't look too much at the furniture and the rug on the floor. Think carefully about how much you're going to have to spend on the actual property.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think the big one, so that the real core one is make sure you've got your funding sorted. So go for a pre-approval, get all of your documentation ready to go. Using a mortgage broker is definitely helpful because they can track down the best deals. So I'd recommend that. When you get into the actual purchase process, so obviously just becoming familiar with the area that you want to buy in and what good pricing is, and you'll pick that up pretty quickly over a couple of weeks, just sort of looking around. And then the other tip is when you do get into, like if you pick up a property that you really like, make sure to get some advice around the condition of the building, because last thing you want to do is end up in a situation where you've got some defective property, which is then going to become your problem in the future. Yeah,
good
so
advice.
Yeah.
Mine is, and my husband and I do this, is we literally had to write down separately what the top 3 things were that we wouldn't compromise.
Oh, yes. My wife and I did something similar.
Oh, yeah?
And we both had really long lists.
Yeah. That's why we had to limit, because mine was really long.
Yeah.
And we both ended up compromising, right?
Yeah.
For me, I wouldn't compromise privacy, for example. I just value being able to be at home and not be able to see a neighbour. So that was just really important to me. And the husband needed room for his digger, his boat, his motorbike, his man shed. And for him, that was just vitally important. And ironically, important for me too, because it meant he could bugger off to the man shed.
Yeah, go somewhere else.
Yeah, particularly in lockdown. So that was quite good. I think we've done a really good job with that. So I think now, Chris, we're going to move into the next part. So I like to keep things fair on this podcast.
Yep.
So you now get to ask me something.
Yeah, okay. So I had a question coming in, which was diversity is sort of a well-known issue in business. I guess female, like gender balance, particularly in senior roles, and then I guess more widely in terms of diversity. What's your sort of view on how you actually solve that?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's a massive issue.
It is. And there's some really good tips for it, right? So one is being aware of it.
Yeah.
And I think that it used to be that in particular industries we had more Pākehā males employing more Pākehā. And it's kind of what you know, it's who you saw, you related better, right? And then I think we've seen the understanding both from a practical business sense that profits go up when you have a more diverse workforce, and that these guys are actually relatively smart, most of them, and they get that. So being aware of your own, and it's not an anti-bias, right? It's just that we relate to people who are like us a lot, and you can see that change. So being aware of it's a good start. Refuse to take a shortlist from your HR department that doesn't include different ethnicities and genders.
Yeah.
Just refuse to.
That makes heaps of sense.
Yeah, just say, I'm sorry, if I'm interviewing 5 people, then at least 3 of them should be able to be a more diverse.
Not your generic white guy.
Yeah. So just absolutely insist on it.
Yeah.
And then when you've got them, you want to retain them, right? So you need to really think about your own management style. You need to speak directly. You need to ask the question. It might be that it's a different culture. So is there something I need to counter in that's personal for you on family or religion? Or how can I make this a safer place for you to be in? How do I communicate with you differently? And be really open to hearing that, so that you are making it an environment that they want to be in. And quite frankly, if you were doing that in an interview process, you're probably more likely to want to come and work for you as well.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we shy away from asking the harder questions because we are concerned that it might offend. Well, actually, if you're doing it from a position of wanting to be a better workplace and a better manager, my experience is that most people react really well to that.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice.
Yeah, I mean, someone might say, actually, my religion is completely my own business. It doesn't enter my workplace and I don't want to discuss it. Cool, I know that now.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's good, yeah. Because I guess as a white guy and a manager, you'd have to be really conscious of creating those opportunities to get more diversity into the business.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Okay, then we do the segment which is from my infamous quote of Zip It Sweetie that I did years ago, and this is kind of where we get to rant quickly on something that might have killed our buzz this week.
I'll tell you my example,
go on.
right? Because I got a heads up that this was coming. So that the thing that killed my buzz this week was coffee pricing, specifically oat milk. And so I don't know about you, I get oat milk in my coffee, right? And so the other day I go and I get an Americano, so like a black coffee with a little bit of milk. And then at the last minute I'm like, oh, do you mind if I get that oat milk instead of normal milk? And they're like, yeah, sure. And then they added $1 for that.
Ooh.
And I was like, mate, that's like ruthless pricing for like your tablespoon of oat milk. And that completely killed my buzz.
It would kill your buzz. I can kind of get that.
Yeah, all the people outside of Auckland are like, man, these stupid Aucklanders.
Aucklanders, eh? Well, I'm going to have an Auckland rant as well then.
Yeah,
mine is, I was listening to John Key a few weeks ago and he was speaking and he was saying how we're not all going back into the office the same and all the rest of it. And I sit in traffic for 3 times as long as it would take me in the mornings, and I think, everyone's going into the office and we just still haven't counted that. Well, I think that the traffic's well back to pre-COVID, which is where your beauty of living in an apartment in the city, I'm sure, absolutely fixes that.
Yeah, we had a short stint where we were commuting and it was just never again.
Yeah, fair enough. Chris, thank you for your time today and your valuable advice. I think that will be a great help for a lot of people. Look, we've gone from some of the basics, I know, but then we've really gone into some of the challenges, and I'm really grateful for you being here and for giving that advice. And that's it for another episode of Ask Me Anything. You can get in touch with me by emailing paula.bennett@nzme.co.nz. You can get hold of Chris. Just log into that Bayleys website and you will find him there. Send me through questions for the podcast. You can find me, Paula Bennett, on Facebook, Instagram or LinkedIn. Make sure you follow Ask Me Anything on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also read my weekly column in the Herald on Sunday. I'm Paula Bennett. Ask Me Anything. Goodbye.